August 4th, 1884. Election Day. Morehead, Kentucky. By sunset, one man lay dead on the courthouse lawn. Solomon Bradley, 37 years old. Farmer. Husband to Letitia. Father. The only sober man at the polls that day. Shot during a political argument. Democrats versus Republicans. Accusations of who fired first. John Martin drawing his pistol. Floyd Tolliver arriving with the sheriff. Rocks thrown from both sides. Then gunfire. Bradley fell. Blood spreading in the August dust. Temperature in the high 80s. Humid. The kind of heat that makes shirts stick to backs and tempers run short. Both suspected shooters were indicted for manslaughter. Both released on bail. The system working. Democracy functioning. Justice preparing to be served through courts and law. That lasted 4 months. By December, both men were dead. Martin shot Floyd Tolliver in a Winchester bar. Then Tolliver supporters forged court documents, boarded a train, and executed Martin while his wife listened from 3 cars away. Then Craig Tolliver, Floyd's brother, became town marshal and ruled Morehead through systematic intimidation for nearly 3 years. 20 people died, 16 wounded. Population dropped from 700 to 296 as families fled. State militia deployed 3 times. A general recommended dissolving the entire county. The violence only ended when 121 armed men laid siege to a hotel in broad daylight, killing 4 men in a 2-hour shootout. This wasn't a drug war, wasn't organized crime, wasn't a dispute over land or money or revenge for some ancient wrong. It was neighbors, store owners, and doctors. County clerks and farmers, people who'd lived side by side for decades, people who knew each other's children, who attended the same churches, who traded at the same stores. The trigger? A rock thrown at a polling station. A single gunshot where no one could agree who fired first. A political argument on a hot August afternoon. By July 1885, 90% of Rowan County's men had chosen sides. 9 out of 10. Everyone was either Martin or Tolliver, Republican or Democrat, family or enemy. Here's what makes this story matter in 2024. Every single element that made this war possible still exists. Political tribalism, economic desperation, failed institutions, honor culture, the belief that violence is justified when the system fails. The question isn't whether it could happen again. The question is, how close are we right now? Rowan County, Kentucky. August 1884. Eastern Kentucky, where the Appalachian Mountains rise like ancient walls separating communities from the modern world. Morehead sits in a valley carved by the Licking River and Triplet Creek. County seat. Population 700. Mostly farmers and store owners. Blacksmiths. A few physicians. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone knows everyone's business. Everyone knows which families supported the Union and which whispered sympathies for the Confederacy. The courthouse dominates Main Street. 2-story brick building. Red clay bricks fired locally. Windows facing north and south for cross-ventilation in the brutal Kentucky summers. The 3rd courthouse on this exact spot. The first burned March 21st, 1864. Confederate guerrillas. Pro-Southern raiders who swept through Union-sympathizing counties, lighting fires and settling scores. The building burned to ash. Every deed, every will, every marriage record, every birth certificate. History erased. They rebuilt it in 1866. It stood for 14 years before factional violence consumed it again in 1880. Different war, same hate. Every legal record created since the Civil War. Gone. Burned. The only documents that survived were those held in private hands by lawyers and families who didn't trust the county to protect them. Now, it's 1884. The current courthouse has stood for 4 years. On August 4th, it will witness its 3rd war. 19 years since Appomattox. 19 years since Lee surrendered and the nation claimed to reunite. But in Rowan County, the war never left. Republicans remember who fought for the Union, who lost sons at Shiloh and Antietam, who came home with missing limbs and permanent hatred for anyone who'd supported secession. Democrats remember who wore the grey, who'd had property confiscated, who'd been labelled traitors in their own towns. They vote in blocks. They marry within factions. They refuse to trade at stores owned by the other side. They settle disputes with fists, rocks, and increasingly with guns. In August, temperatures climb into the high 80s. Humidity makes the air thick enough to chew, the kind of heat that makes shirts stick to backs by mid-morning. That makes men short-tempered by noon. That makes whiskey taste necessary rather than optional. Add election day traditions where candidates freely distribute liquor to buy votes, and you have the recipe for violence. But this isn't unique to Rowan County. This is Reconstruction. This is what happens when you try to stitch together a nation that spent 4 years slaughtering each other. This is what happens when economic collapse meets political tribalism, meets weapons and alcohol. This is America in 1884. The question isn't why violence happened in Rowan County. The question is why it got so much worse than everywhere else. To understand why 20 men would die over a courthouse election, you need to understand what came before. 1877 through 1879. The Underwood-Holbrook feud. 20 people dead over 3 years. Land disputes. Political rivalries. Accusations of theft and betrayal. The mathematics of revenge spiraling until every male member of the Underwood family lay in graves. Not metaphorical, literal. Every man with the Underwood name, killed. Husbands, sons, brothers, uncles. The family name carried forward only through women who'd married out. John Martin fought in that war, not as an Underwood by blood, but as their supporter. He'd rented land from George Underwood when his own fortunes collapsed. When you rent from someone in eastern Kentucky, you fight for them. Simple as that. Loyalty wasn't about ideology. It was about survival. Floyd Tolliver also fought for the Underwoods. Different family. Same side. He and Martin had stood together, had fired shots at the same enemies, had celebrated when Holbrook supporters fell. They knew what blood feuds looked like. Knew the progression, the terrible arithmetic. 1 death plus revenge equals 2 deaths. 2 deaths plus revenge equals 4. 4 becomes 8. 8 becomes 16. The numbers double until everyone is dead or has fled. They'd watched it happen. They'd participated in making it happen. They knew exactly where this road led. The Underwood-Holbrook feud should have been their education, their vaccination against ever starting down that path again. They'd seen families destroyed, seen children made orphans, seen widows begging for mercy that never came. They knew. And in 1884, they chose to repeat it anyway. Here's the first uncomfortable truth. These weren't innocent men. This wasn't good versus evil. This was broken versus broken. John Martin had falsified public records. As county clerk, he'd changed names on voting rolls, added phantom voters, deleted opponents, the kind of corruption so common in Reconstruction Kentucky that it barely rated notice until someone lost an election because of it. Then it became a crime. He'd also gambled away his store. Cards, dice, whatever game was offered at whatever establishment would extend credit. Lost everything. Then lost his county clerk position when the falsification charges became public. After that, illegal distilling, moonshine, operating stills hidden in hollows where revenue agents couldn't easily reach. Not romantic grandpa's recipe for personal consumption. Business, industrial scale. The only business in a failing economy that generated real cash money instead of credit and barter. Illegal, but widely accepted as economic necessity. Floyd Tolliver was a Democrat in a system where party loyalty meant everything, where losing an election could mean losing your livelihood because county jobs went to the winning party, where being on the wrong side meant your business got no government contracts, your family got no appointments, your faction got frozen out. Politics wasn't abstract. It was survival. Neither Martin nor Tolliver was a hero. Neither was purely a villain. They were desperate men in a failing system making desperate choices. The kind of choices that seem rational right up until someone dies. John Martin, 52 years old in 1884. Medium height probably, though no physical descriptions survive in the historical record. Former county clerk, former store owner, current moonshiner, current dead man walking, though he doesn't know it yet. He'd worked his way up from tenant farmer to clerk, respectable position, required literacy, numeracy, political connections. He'd achieved something. Then gambling destroyed it. Cards, dice, whatever game was running. Eastern Kentucky in the 1870s had gambling in every establishment that served alcohol, which was every establishment. He lost the store to debts. Then allegations of falsifying voting records cost him the clerkship. Not proven in court. Didn't need to be. The accusation alone meant he'd never be elected again. After that, moonshine. In Rowan County, when the legal economy fails, men turn to illegal liquor. Not romantic, not noble. Business. The only business that paid real money instead of credit. A well-run still could produce 50 gallons a week. Sold for $1 a gallon wholesale, 2 retail. $50 a week in cash when farm labor paid maybe 5. The mathematics made sense. The risk of arrest existed, but seemed abstract compared to the certainty of starvation. His father, Dr. Ben Martin, was wealthy by county standards, physician, landowner, owned a substantial farm, respected, could have supported his son. Probably did to some extent. But John had squandered his chances, had gambled away his inheritance. The details aren't recorded. Just that by 1884, John Martin operated an illegal distillery and held strong Republican political opinions. He had a wife. The sources don't record her first name. She's just Mrs. Martin in court documents and newspaper accounts. The historical record tells us nothing about her, except that she loved him enough to ride on the same train when he was being transferred to jail. Close enough to hear him die. 3 cars away. Close enough to hear the shots. Too far to help. He wasn't running for sheriff in 1884. The election was for sheriff and other county offices. Martin wasn't on the ballot. But he had strong opinions about who should win. Republican opinions. The kind you stated loudly at polling places. The kind you defended with your fists when challenged. The kind that, on August 4th, would escalate to pistols. Was John Martin a victim? He'd be dead by December. Ambushed on a train by men pretending to be lawful deputies. Shot multiple times. Murdered without trial. His wife listening helplessly from another car. By that definition, yes. Victim. Was he innocent? He'd falsified public records. Operated illegal stills. And on August 4th, multiple witnesses would testify that he drew his pistol first. Started the gunfight that killed Solomon Bradley. By that definition, no, not innocent. Both things can be true simultaneously. This is the moral complexity that made the Rowan County War so tragic. Nobody was purely good. Nobody was purely evil. Everyone had justifications. Everyone had grievances. Everyone believed they were defending themselves against aggression. And that belief, that certainty of righteousness, killed 20 people. Floyd Tolliver, Democrat, also formerly of the Underwood faction, political rival of John Martin. Beyond that, the historical record goes nearly silent. No detailed physical descriptions survive. No documented occupation. No record of children, though he was old enough to have them. The sources that mention him at all focus on 2 things. He was there on August 4th, and he died in December. Everything else is inference and guesswork. What we know, he arrived at the courthouse on August 4th with Sheriff John C. Day. The sources say they came to restore peace, to stop the violence before it started. Whether that's true, or whether they came to intimidate Republican voters depends on which faction you believe. Both versions exist in the historical record with equal confidence. Whether he fired first, or Martin did, sources disagree. Whether he killed Solomon Bradley or someone else did, sources disagree. Whether he was defending himself or committing murder, sources disagree. The only people who knew with certainty were too drunk or too partisan to be believed. The only thing everyone agrees on: Floyd Tolliver died that December, shot by John Martin in a Winchester bar while his hand was still in his coat pocket, meaning he hadn't drawn his own weapon yet, meaning by the technical definition, he was shot while unarmed, meaning John Martin executed him. But Floyd's last words would become prophecy, witnessed by multiple people, recorded in court testimony. As he lay dying, bleeding out on a bar floor, he looked at his friends and said, "Remember what you swore to do. You said you would kill him. Keep your word." Addressed to his friends, to his brother Craig, to everyone who'd sworn revenge if anything happened to him. Those words became a contract, a blood oath, the foundation for everything that followed. Floyd Tolliver died. His brother Craig listened, and 2.5 years of systematic violence became inevitable. But here's the question: was Floyd Tolliver a hero trying to restore order, shot down by a criminal? Or was he an aggressor trying to intimidate voters, killed in justified self-defense? The truth is simpler and worse. Nobody knows. Both sides claimed righteousness. Both sides were armed. Both sides were drunk on whiskey and political fury. And Solomon Bradley died because two sides couldn't agree on what happened. Floyd Tolliver's importance isn't what he did. It's what his death unleashed. His brother Craig would become the face of the war, would rule Moorhead through fear for nearly 3 years, would kill at least 6 people directly and order the deaths of many more, would die in a shootout involving over 100 armed men, would become the monster that John Martin's supporters claimed Floyd had been. Whether Floyd deserved to die in that Winchester bar, history can't say, but the 20 deaths that followed can all be traced back to that moment, to those last words, to that blood oath. Solomon Bradley, born March 10th, 1847, 37 years old, married to Letitia Wells, father, farmer, the first person to die in the Rowan County War. The only person everyone agrees was innocent. The sources call him Martin's friend and partisan. They call him sober. Specifically note that detail. The only sober man at the polls that day. That matters. That detail carries weight. Everyone else was drinking. Everyone else was arguing, shouting, throwing rocks, waving pistols. Bradley was sober. The one trying to keep peace, the one trying to prevent exactly what happened. He went to the polls to vote, exercise his democratic right, participate in self-governance, all the civic virtues that America claims to cherish. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong friends. When the shooting started, and sources cannot agree on who fired first, a bullet hit him, struck him in the chest. He fell on the courthouse lawn, red clay soil, August heat. He bled out while men around him argued about who'd killed him, argued about whose fault it was, argued about whether it was murder or accident or justified. He died there, on the courthouse lawn, 37 years old, while politicians and drunks debated blame. His widow, Letitia, buried him in Lee Cemetery in Moorhead, raised their children alone. The historical record doesn't say how many children, doesn't record their names, doesn't explain how she survived economically, doesn't mention if she remarried or stayed a widow. She exists in the sources only as Bradley's wife, as the woman who buried him, as a footnote. Solomon Bradley was the first victim of the Rowan County War. He wasn't a fighter, wasn't a politician, wasn't running for office or operating illegal stills or falsifying records. He was a farmer who went to vote, a bystander. And his death should have been the tragedy that stopped everything. Should have been the moment when both sides looked at the body and said, "Enough. This has gone too far. We're killing innocent people now. We need to stop." Instead, it was the match that lit the fuse, because both sides blamed the other. Martin's supporters said Tolliver killed Bradley. Tolliver's supporters said Martin killed Bradley. Some said Sheriff Day killed Bradley accidentally. Some said Bradley was shot by a stray round from someone else entirely. Nobody knew. Everyone claimed certainty. Nobody accepted responsibility. 20 people would die in this war. Solomon Bradley was the only one everyone could agree was innocent. No moonshining, no falsified records, no intimidation, no violence. Just a man who went to vote. His grave still exists in Lee Cemetery, maintained by family or historical society or civic duty. His name carved in stone. Born March 10th, 1847. Died August 4th, 1884. 37 years. The stone doesn't say who killed him, because nobody knows. The other players, the cast that would drive the war forward even after the original antagonists were dead. Sheriff John C. Day, acting sheriff on August 4th. He accompanied Floyd Tolliver to the courthouse. Multiple witnesses testified he was present. Later, he'd be charged with shooting Adam Sizemore and with the murder of Solomon Bradley. Whether those charges were true or politically motivated, history can't definitively say. He'd be caught in the machinery of revenge whether he deserved it or not. Cook Humphrey, Republican, elected sheriff in 1884, chose to side with Dr. Ben Martin's faction after John Martin's death. As sheriff, he had official power, badge, authority, legal backing. But authority means nothing when the opposing faction has numbers and weapons and willingness to kill. He'd face constant intimidation, pressure to resign, threats against his family, and eventually, the Martin faction would need him because official power still mattered even in chaos. Dr. Ben Martin, John Martin's father, physician, wealthy by county standards, owned substantial farmland, respected, the kind of man whose word carried weight in court. After his son's murder in December, he'd become the faction leader not through ambition, but through necessity. Someone had to organize resistance against Craig Tolliver. Someone had to represent the Martin interests. That burden fell to him. Daniel Boone Logan, born April 23, 1864, 20 years old in 1884, attorney, gifted legist according to contemporary accounts. In December, Craig Tolliver would kill two of Logan's cousins, the sources never record their names, in retaliation for Floyd Tolliver's death. That would make it personal. For 2.5 years, Logan would watch Craig Tolliver rule Moorhead through fear, would watch families flee, would watch the population drop by more than half, would watch the legal system fail completely. And on June 22, 1887, Daniel Boone Logan would lead 121 armed men in laying siege to a hotel, would coordinate a 2-hour shootout that killed 4 men, would end the war through violence because law had failed, then would leave Moorhead in September 1887, would move to Huntington, West Virginia, would build a successful legal career, would die in April 1919 at age 55, having never spoken publicly about what he did. Craig Tolliver, Floyd's brother, would become town marshal after Floyd's death, would use official power to intimidate, threaten, and kill. The sources describe him as physically imposing, though exact details aren't recorded. One quote attributes to someone, possibly Randolph McCoy, though sourcing is unclear, describing him as 6 feet of devil and 180 pounds of hell. Whether that's accurate or embellishment, it captures how his enemies saw him. He'd rule Moorhead for nearly 3 years, from December 1884 until June 1887. Would turn a town of 700 into a ghost town of 296 through systematic terror. Would die in that final shootout, killed by overwhelming force from men who'd decided law couldn't stop him. These were the players. None of them wanted war. All of them would get it anyway. The pieces were in place. The grudges were established. The political divisions were absolute. The economic desperation was crushing. The honor culture demanded blood for blood. And the legal system that was supposed to prevent this, courts, sheriffs, judges, law, would fail completely. August 4th, 1884. Election day. Temperature climbing into the high 80s. Humidity thick. Whiskey flowing. Tempers short. Guns loaded. Everything was ready. The war just needed someone to fire the first shot. Someone did. August 4th, 1884. Election day. temperature climbing through the mid-80s toward 90 by afternoon, humidity thick enough to taste, the kind of heat where sweat soaks through shirts by mid-morning and stays there, where tempers fray before noon, where whiskey seems less like indulgence and more like necessity. The courthouse lawn, packed, farmers in work clothes, store owners in their better shirts, a few physicians, Democrats clustering on one side, Republicans on the other, the physical division visible from a distance, two separate crowds pretending to be one electorate. Rocks piled for throwing, not metaphorical, actual rocks, fist-sized stones gathered in convenient heaps. This is how elections were fought in Rowan County. Intimidation through the threat of violence. Sometimes the threat became reality. Someone would throw the first rock. Others would follow. Fistfights would erupt. Then everyone would go home and pretend democracy had occurred. Whiskey flowing freely. Multiple sources agree on this detail. Someone, sources don't identify who, distributed so much whiskey that morning that by noon, most men at the polls were drunk. Not tipsy, drunk, stumbling, slurring. Making decisions with impaired judgment and inflamed passions. This is how votes were bought. Candidates would supply barrels of whiskey, free drinks for anyone who'd vote their way. Legal, no. Common, absolutely. Expected, essential. A candidate who didn't provide whiskey wouldn't get elected. John Martin wasn't running for office. He was there as a voter and Republican partisan, vocal supporter of the Republican slate. Floyd Tolliver, similarly, wasn't a candidate. Democrat, vocal. Both men with strong opinions about who should win. Both men willing to fight about it. The argument started over politics. It always started over politics. Which candidate? Which party? Which faction? The content didn't matter. The intensity did. By early afternoon, voices were raised. Men were shouting, fingers pointing, accusations flying. The kind of argument that attracts a crowd, that pulls other men into taking sides, that escalates from words to violence in the space of heartbeats. The argument turned physical. Fists. Someone threw a punch. Someone returned it. Then others joined. Republicans fighting Democrats. Martin supporters fighting Tolliver supporters. Bodies grappling. Men falling. Dust rising. And then rocks. Thrown from both sides. Not just threats now. Actual violence. Stones hitting flesh. Drawing blood. Creating injuries. John Martin drew his pistol. The first pistol drawn. This detail is documented. Multiple witnesses testified to this sequence. Martin drew first. Whether he intended to fire or just to intimidate, sources don't say. But the act of drawing changed everything, made the violence potentially lethal, transformed a fistfight into something that could end in death. Others drew weapons in response. When one man draws a pistol in a crowd of drunk, angry partisans, everyone draws. Self-defense, mutual intimidation, the mathematics of escalation. Within seconds, 10 men had guns visible, pointed, fingers on triggers. Any moment could explode into gunfire. Floyd Tolliver and Sheriff John C. Day arrived. Later testimony from witnesses who weren't drunk or partisan claimed they came to restore order, to stop the violence before someone died. Martin supporters claimed they came to intimidate Republican voters. To use official authority, Day was sheriff, to suppress opposition. Both versions exist in the historical record with equal confidence from opposing sides. Someone threw a rock, hit Tolliver, or Day, or both. Sources conflict. But thrown rocks met the arriving authority figures. Whether intentional targeting or stray throws from the ongoing melee, unknown. But the message was clear. Whoever threw that rock wasn't interested in authority restoring order. Someone fired a shot. The first shot. The shot that transformed Election Day into the first battle of the Rowan County War. Who fired it? Nobody agrees. Martin testified later that Tolliver fired first. Tolliver supporters testified Martin fired first. Some witnesses claimed Sheriff Day discharged his weapon accidentally. Others said a third party fired into the air trying to break up the fight. The historical record contains all these versions. None can be verified. What everyone agrees, Solomon Bradley fell, 37 years old, sober, uninvolved in the fistfight or the argument, shot through the chest. He dropped on the courthouse lawn, red clay soil, August heat, blood spreading. He tried to speak, tried to understand what had happened, why he'd been shot when he'd done nothing. He died there within minutes. Adam Sizemore, severely wounded, shot in the leg or torso, sources vary, survived but crippled, would carry the injury the rest of his life as permanent reminder of August 4th. John Martin, shot in the arm, not life-threatening, painful. Evidence he'd been in the gunfight, evidence that someone had shot back when he drew his pistol. The shooting stopped. Sudden silence. The kind of silence that follows violence when participants realize what they've done. Then screaming. Bradley's friends seeing his body. Sizemore crying out in pain. Accusations shouted. Blame hurled. Who started it? Who shot first? Who killed Bradley? Both Martin and Tolliver arrested, both charged with manslaughter. The charges were identical. Either could have fired the fatal shot, or neither, or someone else entirely. The law did what it could with insufficient evidence and conflicting testimony, charged both, released both on bail pending trial. The system worked. Democracy worked. Violence had occurred, but law responded. Arrests made, charges filed, trial scheduled. Justice would be served through courts and due process, and the orderly mechanisms of civilization. Both men would face juries. Evidence would be presented. Verdicts reached. Whatever happened next would happen legally. That lasted exactly 4 months. December 1884. 4 months after the courthouse shooting. No trial date set. Delays and continuances and legal maneuvering. Both men free on bail. Both waiting for justice that kept postponing itself. John Martin moved to Winchester for safety, Clark County, 40 miles from Moorhead, neutral ground where Tolliver supporters were fewer and less organized. He was awaiting trial for manslaughter, possibly for murder. Sources differ on whether the charge had been elevated, but he was safe, away from Moorhead, away from the Tollivers, protected by distance. Floyd Tolliver was also in Winchester. Why he was there, sources don't explain. Perhaps business, perhaps coincidence. Perhaps he'd come specifically looking for Martin. The historical record doesn't say. They saw each other in a bar. Which bar? No name recorded. What time of day? Unknown. Whether they'd been drinking together or separately, sources don't specify. Whether they argued before the shooting, conflicting testimony. Whether the meeting was chance or planned, impossible to determine. What happened next is documented with clinical precision. John Martin fired his pistol, his hand still in his coat pocket when he pulled the trigger. 1 shot. Floyd Tolliver fell, mortally wounded. The bullet struck center mass. Tolliver collapsed, bleeding, dying. His last words, witnessed by multiple people, recorded in court testimony, repeated in newspaper accounts. Remember what you swore to do. You said you would kill him. Keep your word. Addressed to his friends, to his brother Craig, who was present or arrived shortly after, to everyone who'd sworn revenge if anything happened to Floyd. Those words became a contract, a blood oath, the explicit instruction that would drive the next 2.5 years of violence. Floyd Tolliver, dying on a bar floor, transforming his death into a command for vengeance. He died there. December 1884. Age unknown. Sources never recorded it. Witnesses testified he never drew his own weapon, that Martin shot him while his hands were still visible and empty, that by any technical definition this was murder, execution of an unarmed man. John Martin was immediately arrested, jailed in Winchester for his own protection. Now he'd killed a man, not in a confused melee with rocks and multiple shooters, in a bar, one-on-one, shot Floyd Tolliver while Tolliver's hand was still in his pocket. The manslaughter charge would become murder. The evidence was clear. Witnesses plentiful. Martin would face trial and probably hang. The system still worked. Martin was in custody. The law had him. Justice would be served. A trial would determine guilt. A jury would render verdict. Whatever punishment was appropriate would be imposed through legal means. That lasted exactly 1 day. The day after Floyd's killing. John Martin sat in Clark County Jail, Winchester, Kentucky. Safe. Protected by stone walls and iron bars and legal authority. Charged with murder. Awaiting trial. But alive. Secure. 40 miles from Moorhead. From the Tollivers. From revenge. Then 2 deputies arrived. Official-looking men with badges. They presented documents to the jailer. Court order. Transfer prisoner Martin back to Moorhead for trial. Signed. Sealed. Everything appeared legitimate. The jailer examined the papers. The signatures looked correct. The seals matched the court's official seal. The language was proper legal terminology. No obvious signs of forgery. He had no reason to doubt. Official transfer orders were common. Prisoners needed to be moved for various legal reasons. He released John Martin to the 2 men. The documents were forged. The deputies were Tolliver supporters. The signatures were faked. The seals were counterfeited. The entire transfer was an elaborate deception designed to extract Martin from the safety of legal custody and deliver him to execution. John Martin realized too late what was happening. Whether he recognized the fake deputies immediately or only after boarding the train, unknown. But at some point the truth became clear. He was prisoner of men who intended to kill him. No legal protection, no due process, no escape. The train. Winchester to Moorhead. Standard passenger service. Mrs. Martin. The sources never record her first name. She exists only as wife, rode in a separate car. She didn't know her husband was prisoner, thought he was being legally transferred for trial, expected to see him processed through proper channels in Moorhead, had no reason to suspect anything wrong. The train stopped at Farmers, Kentucky, small settlement between Winchester and Moorhead, barely a town, just a station where trains paused briefly. Armed men boarded. How many? Sources don't specify. Multiple shooters based on the number of wounds, probably 4 to 6 based on the speed of the attack. Mrs. Martin 3 cars away heard gunshots. Multiple guns. Multiple shooters firing in rapid sequence. The distinctive sound of pistols discharging in enclosed space. Loud even through multiple train cars. Impossible to mistake for anything else. She knew. In that instant, she knew. The particular knowledge that comes when your worst fear manifests. She ran through the cars, passengers scattering, some ducking, others pressing against windows trying to see what happened. She found him. John Martin shot multiple times. The newspaper account from the Maysville Daily Evening Bulletin, dated December 11th, 1884, headline reading, "A train stopped and a murderer riddled with bullets," described extensive wounds. Chest, abdomen, arms. The shooters had fired until their weapons were empty. Overkill. Not just execution, but destruction. Statement through excess violence. Bleeding. Dying. Martin saw his wife. Tried to speak. Whether he named his killers or said goodbye or simply looked at her, sources don't record. The moment exists only in her memory, and she never gave detailed testimony about those final words. The attackers fled, jumped from the train, and disappeared into Kentucky woods. The train continued to Moorhead. Martin lived long enough to walk from the train to the Powers Hotel, supported by others, leaving a trail of blood. Witnesses reported he remained conscious, aware he was dying, unable to prevent it. He died the next day, his wife beside him. December 1884, age 52, murdered without trial, executed by vigilantes using forged documents to subvert the legal system he'd trusted to protect him. Was this murder? Absolutely. Forged documents, ambush, execution without trial, violation of every principle of law and justice, multiple felonies culminating in murder. Was this justice? To the Tollivers, yes. Martin had murdered Floyd, shot him while his hand was in his pocket, killed an unarmed man. The law couldn't be trusted to convict Martin. Juries were partisan. Judges were elected by Republicans. The system was rigged. Mountain justice, blood for blood, was the only reliable justice. To Martin's supporters, cold-blooded assassination. The system was working. Martin was in custody, awaiting trial. The law was processing him. Whatever punishment he deserved would be determined by jury. Instead, he was murdered through elaborate deception. Both sides were right. Both sides were wrong. And the most tragic detail, Mrs. Martin heard her husband die. 3 cars away. Close enough to hear the shots. Close enough to know. Too far to help. Too far to save him. She'd been on the same train, riding to the same destination. Separated by 3 cars and the width of everything. December 1884. Both original fighters dead. Floyd Tolliver buried. John Martin buried. The 2 men whose arguments started this war, gone. The conflict should have ended. Death on both sides. Blood spilled equally. Both families grieving. Logic suggested this was over. Instead, it metastasized, because Craig Tolliver had heard his brother's last words, had received the blood oath, had made his promise, and Craig Tolliver was more dangerous than Floyd had ever been. January 1885. Both original fighters dead. The county should have breathed relief, should have mourned the dead and moved forward, should have let law take its course prosecuting the train ambush murderers, should have chosen peace. Instead, Craig Tolliver became town marshal, official position. Badge, authority, legal power to arrest, to enforce, to intimidate with the backing of law. He'd already killed 2 of Boone Logan's cousins in immediate retaliation for Floyd's death. The sources never record their names. Don't describe how they died. Don't explain whether they were targeted for participation in Floyd's killing or simply for being Martin allies. Just that Craig killed them. 2 men dead within days of Floyd's death. Statement of intent. Declaration of war. Now Craig had official power. Town marshal in a system where law enforcement meant everything or nothing depending on who held the badge. He used it. Systematically. Ruthlessly. With the kind of bureaucratic violence that's more terrifying than open warfare because it carries the illusion of legitimacy. Families chose sides. Not slowly. Not gradually. Quickly. Within weeks, the division was absolute. Democratic families supported Craig Tolliver, not because they approved of murder, but because party loyalty trumped everything. Because Craig was Democrat. Because the Martins were Republican. Because in Rowan County, political identity was tribal identity, was family identity. You supported your faction, or you ceased to exist socially. Republican families supported Dr. Ben Martin and Sheriff Cook Humphrey. Martin, because he was John Martin's father. Because someone had to lead the opposition. Because leadership falls to those who have status and the will to use it. Humphrey, because he was Republican sheriff. Because his official authority theoretically balanced Craig's. Because law enforcement on both sides meant deadlock meant neither could legally suppress the other. By July 1885, 90% of Rowan County's men had chosen a side, 9 out of 10. The New York Times reported this statistic in an article dated July 6, 1885. Not an estimate, an actual measurement. Journalists had counted, had interviewed, had documented that in Rowan County, neutrality had become impossible. Everyone was either Martin or Tolliver, Republican or Democrat, family or enemy. The other 10% left, packed belongings, abandoned homes and businesses, fled to safer counties, Bath County, Montgomery County, Fleming County, anywhere that wasn't Rowan. They took losses on property sales, left behind investments, severed community ties, because staying meant choosing sides meant risking death. Population 700 in 1885 would drop to 296 by 1887. More than half the town gone, displaced by violence, driven out by fear, the demographic collapse visible in census records, Moorhead transforming from thriving county seat to ghost town. Houses abandoned, businesses closed, streets empty. The physical manifestation of what happens when law fails completely. The killings continued, not daily, not constant warfare, but regular, systematic, targeted. The pattern was consistent: ambush, assassination, murder from cover, no fair fights, no duels, no honorable combat, just killing. Efficient, clinical, designed to terrorize. March 1885. Deputy Baumgartner killed. The sources call it assassination, meaning ambush, meaning he never saw his killer, meaning he was shot without warning from cover. Whether he was targeted for his law enforcement position or for personal reasons, unknown. Just that he died. Added to the count. March 1885. Colonel Z.T. Young shot. He survived. Newspaper coverage in the Maysville Daily Evening Bulletin, dated March 10th, and the Hazel Green Herald, dated March 18th. The fact that newspapers in neighboring counties covered it demonstrates how widely the violence had spread, how concerned Kentucky was becoming about Rowan County, how the reputation of Bloody Rowan was forming. March 1885. Warren Alderson killed. The Maysville Daily Evening Bulletin reported it March 30th. Another name, another body, another family grieving. The sources don't explain who he was beyond the name. Don't say if he was Martin or Tolliver faction. Don't describe circumstances. Just record his death as part of the ongoing violence. July 1886. A sheriff shot while attempting an arrest. The newspaper headline documented, but sources conflict on which sheriff, Cook Humphrey or someone else. Badly wounded. Evidence that even law enforcement with official authority and legal backing couldn't function safely. That badges meant nothing when both sides were armed and willing to kill. Every death pulled more families into the conflict. Every killing demanded revenge. The spiral accelerating. The mathematics of feuds playing out exactly as anyone who'd lived through the Underwood-Holbrook feud could have predicted. One death creates duty for revenge. That revenge death creates duty for counter-revenge. The cycle continues until everyone is dead or exhausted or gone. 3 times the governor sent militia. The Louisville Legion, uniformed soldiers, professional military, armed with rifles and authority to impose martial law. They arrived with orders to restore peace, to stop the killing, to enforce law when local law enforcement had failed. First deployment, 1884, after the courthouse shooting. They patrolled, enforced curfews, investigated crimes, arrested suspects. Order was temporarily restored. The violence paused. Then they left, and the killing resumed. Second deployment, 1885. Same pattern. Arrival, patrols, temporary peace, withdrawal, resumed violence. Third deployment, July 1887, after the final battle. This time, they stayed longer, made more arrests, conducted more investigations, but eventually they withdrew, because militia deployment is temporary by nature. Because Kentucky couldn't keep soldiers in Rowan County permanently. Because the underlying conditions, the political tribalism, the economic desperation, the honor culture, none of that changed just because uniformed men were present. General Sam Hill wrote a report to the governor. The full text isn't available in sources I found, but the conclusion was documented across multiple accounts. Recommend that Rowan County be dissolved, abolished, erased from the map, the boundaries redrawn, the jurisdiction eliminated. The county divided among neighbors who might be able to govern what Rowan County couldn't govern itself. The county is beyond saving, Hill argued. The violence is so entrenched that the only solution is to eliminate the jurisdiction entirely, remove the political structure that both sides are fighting to control. Make Rowan County cease to exist legally. The recommendation was not followed. Kentucky chose to keep trying, keep sending militia, keep hoping law would eventually prevail. But the fact the recommendation was made speaks volumes. A general looked at Rowan County and concluded that governmental extinction was preferable to the status quo. By June 1887, Daniel Boone Logan had had enough. 23 years old, attorney, educated, had studied law, had passed the bar, had built a practice representing clients in legitimate legal matters. The kind of young man who should have been focused on career advancement and marriage prospects and building a respectable life. Instead, he'd spent 2.5 years watching Craig Tolliver rule Moorhead through fear, watching men disappear, watching families flee, watching half the town's population abandon their homes, and most personally, remembering that Craig had killed his 2 cousins back in December 1884. The sources never recorded their names. History forgot them. But Logan remembered. The mountains have rules, not written, not official, but absolute. Blood demands blood. You don't let the murder of family go unavenged. Forgiveness is weakness. Turning the other cheek is cowardice. Honor requires violence. And Logan was a man of the mountains despite his education and legal career. He went to the governor. The details of that meeting aren't recorded. No transcript exists. No contemporaneous account. But the outcome was clear. Logan received tacit approval. The governor wouldn't help, wouldn't provide troops or official backing, wouldn't sanction the violence, but wouldn't stop it either, would look away while Logan did what law couldn't do. Logan organized, recruited, assembled a force, over 100 men. Some sources say exactly 121. The specificity suggests someone counted. Law and Order Party, they called themselves. Chosen name that carried irony given what they planned. Republicans, Martin supporters, men who'd lost relatives, men who wanted their town back, men who'd concluded that violence was the only remaining option. They purchased weapons in Cincinnati, rifles, ammunition, the modern repeating Winchester rifles that had replaced the old muzzle loaders, weapons that could fire multiple rounds without reloading, military-grade firepower. They shipped the weapons secretly, concealed the destination. The Tolliver faction learned something was coming, but not when, or where, or how. June 21st through 22nd, 1887. The war ends. Not through peace, not through reconciliation, not through law, through overwhelming force applied without mercy. June 22nd, 1887. Daytime. Sources don't specify morning or afternoon, but the siege lasted 2 hours in full daylight. Temperature probably in the 80s. June in Kentucky. Clear skies. No cover of darkness. No concealment. The violence would happen in plain view of the entire town. Craig Tolliver and 3 others were at the American Hotel, or a hotel and tavern. Sources use both descriptions interchangeably. Railroad Street location. The sources don't record the names of the 3 others with Craig. History forgot them. They exist only as numbers, as body count, as casualties whose identities weren't important enough to preserve. 121 men surrounded the building, positioned strategically, covering all exits, preventing escape. Some sources say the final shootout involved 60 men actively firing. Whether that means Craig's faction had reinforcements, or the 121 number included both sides, or witnesses miscounted in chaos, unknown. But the numbers suggest organized military action, coordinated positions, planned fields of fire, 2 hours of sustained gunfire, hundreds of rounds fired, the sound thunderous, continuous, echoing off buildings, audible for miles, townspeople hid in cellars, in back rooms of buildings, anywhere away from windows, anywhere the stray bullets couldn't reach. Parents covered children, prayed, waited for silence. The mechanics of a 2-hour gun battle require explanation. Modern firearms allow sustained fire, but even with Winchester repeating rifles, 2 hours means repeated reloading, means ammunition running low, means coordinated fire rather than constant barrage. Some men shooting while others reload. Rotation of positions. Conservation of ammunition. The kind of tactical discipline that suggests military organization. The hotel building absorbed hundreds of rounds, wood splintering, windows shattering, brick chipping, the physical structure becoming pocked and scarred, evidence remaining visible for years afterward, bullet holes marking where the battle occurred. When the smoke cleared, and there was smoke, thick gunpowder smoke that obscured vision and burned throats and marked participants with residue. 4 bodies. Craig Tolliver dead. 3 others dead. Their names lost to history. The Tolliver faction broken. The war over. How Craig died specifically, sources don't say. Fighting to the end. Trying to surrender. Caught in crossfire. Shot while fleeing. The details aren't recorded. Just that he died. That his body was recovered. That the man who'd ruled Moorhead for 2.5 years through intimidation died in a 2-hour shootout. Was this justice? 121 men surrounding 4. No trial, no due process, no opportunity to surrender. Just execution by overwhelming force. The courts later said yes. Most of Logan's men were acquitted. Juries found the killings justifiable. Found that Craig Tolliver's reign of terror justified extra-legal violence. Found that when law fails, citizens have the right to restore order through force. Was this murder? 4 men killed by overwhelming numbers. No quarter given. No mercy shown. Vigilante violence. Mob rule. The breakdown of every principle that separates civilization from barbarism. The answer, as always, both. Craig Tolliver had killed men, had ruled through violence, had made Moorhead unlivable for half its population, had forced hundreds to flee, had corrupted law enforcement, had destroyed community. His death ended that reign. But he died without trial, killed by vigilantes, by a mob, by men who took law into their own hands because they'd concluded the legal system had failed. And they were right about the failure, but wrong about the solution. Or right about the solution, but wrong about the precedent. Or some combination where rightness and wrongness become impossible to separate. Democracy or mob rule. Justice or murder. Liberation or vigilantism. In Rowan County, by June 1887, the line had disappeared entirely. And that disappearance, that moment when civilized people concluded violence was justified, that's the lesson that still matters. Because it can happen anywhere. It can happen to anyone. All it requires is enough people believing the system has failed, believing violence is the only option, believing righteousness justifies extra-legal action. Rowan County wasn't special. The people weren't uniquely evil. They were ordinary Americans pushed past breaking, and the conditions that pushed them still exist. In the months after June 22nd, Kentucky held trials. Not immediately, not in the heat of aftermath, but systematically, deliberately. The legal system attempting to process what had happened, attempting to determine if the siege was justified homicide or mass murder. The trials were relocated. Rowan County couldn't provide impartial juries. Everyone had chosen sides. Everyone had relatives involved. Everyone had opinions that made objectivity impossible. So the cases moved to neighboring counties, Montgomery County, Fleming County, places where the violence hadn't directly touched, but everyone had heard about it, where jurors might render verdicts based on evidence rather than faction. Hiram Pigman, tried before a Fleming County jury, August 24th through 31st, 1887, charged with willful murder. Multiple witnesses testified about his participation in the siege, about his firing shots, about his coordination of positions. The evidence was clear. He'd been there. He'd fired weapons. Men had died. The jury acquitted him, found him not guilty, found that his actions, while violent, were justified by Craig Tolliver's reign of terror. That when law enforcement fails, when the state can't protect citizens, when half a town flees in fear, then extra-legal violence becomes necessary self-defense. A.P. Perry, tried alongside Pigman. Same charges, same evidence, same jury. Acquitted. John Arnold, tried for murdering Stuart Caudle on August 4th, 1887. Different incident, different victim, same pattern. Found not guilty. Ali Young, Taylor Young Sr., Green Mannin, tried August 16th, 1887. Charged with conspiracy to kill Howard Logan. Complicated case involving allegations of planned murder rather than spontaneous violence. acquitted of all charges. The pattern became clear. Juries consistently found the killings justified, found that Craig Tolliver's 2.5-year reign made violence necessary, found that when law fails this completely, citizens have the right to restore order through force. The precedent was explicit, written in court records, established in case law. When the system breaks down sufficiently, mob justice becomes legally acceptable. It's a precedent no one wants to discuss, because the logical conclusion is terrifying. It means that if enough people believe the system has failed, they have legal justification for violence. It means that citizen perception of system failure matters more than whether the system has actually failed. It means that the difference between justified resistance and illegal rebellion comes down to jury sympathy rather than objective standards. After a legislative investigation by the Kentucky State Assembly concluded, after newspapers throughout the state published accounts of the trials, after the verdicts were rendered, the townspeople of Morehead faced what they'd become. Bloody Rowan. That's what the rest of Kentucky called them. The county where neighbors killed each other over politics, where 20 people died, where democracy failed so completely that citizens resorted to siege warfare, where half the population fled, where militia deployed 3 times and still couldn't restore lasting order. The reputation was national. Newspapers from New York to California had covered the story. Morehead. Kentucky became synonymous with political violence. The shame was overwhelming. Not guilt. Many participants believed they'd been justified, but shame at what outsiders thought, at what history would record, at what their children would inherit as identity. Their response: education. 1887. The same year the war ended. The same year Craig Tolliver died in a 2-hour siege. The same year 121 men committed legally justified homicide. That same year, the town founded Morehead Normal School, a teachers' college, an institution dedicated to training educators who would spread literacy and enlightenment throughout eastern Kentucky. It's a remarkable act of redemption. In the year that witnessed systematic political violence, the town chose to establish an institution representing civilization and progress. The symbolism was explicit. Violence had defined their present. Education would define their future. The courthouse lawn where Solomon Bradley died would be balanced by classrooms where children learned conflict resolution. In 1922, the Kentucky General Assembly transformed it into Morehead State University. Today, it enrolls approximately 10,000 students. Largest employer in the town. Primary economic driver. The institution that started as redemption became the region's identity. Morehead is now known for its university more than its violence. The conscious decision to create that institution, made in 1887 by people still traumatized by war, represents remarkable foresight. The courthouse burned twice in violence was rebuilt in 1899, 12 years after the final battle. Long enough that builders didn't fear it would burn again. Today, it serves as the Rowan County Arts Center. The building where political violence erupted now hosts galleries and performances, where factions argued and shot each other. Artists display work and musicians perform. The transformation is complete. The population never fully recovered. 700 in 1885, 296 in 1887. Today, approximately 7,000, still below the peak. Some families never came back, left for Cincinnati, Huntington, Lexington, built lives elsewhere, severed ties with Rowan County. Their descendants might not even know their ancestors fled political violence. The displacement was permanent for many. October 1889, 2 years after the war ended. Grace Martin, daughter of Gills Martin of the Martin faction, married Frank Tolliver, brother of Craig Tolliver, who died in the siege. Martin and Tolliver, in the same church, celebrating a union instead of planning violence. Both families attended. According to newspaper reports, the entirety of both families, Martins and Tollivers, sitting in the same pews, standing for the same ceremony, watching 2 young people who'd grown up during the war choose love over inherited hatred. The press called them The Capulets and Montagues of Kentucky. The parallel to Shakespeare's tragedy was obvious. Two feuding families, young lovers from opposing sides. But unlike Romeo and Juliet, Grace and Frank lived. Their union didn't end in suicide, but in hope. In the possibility that cycles of violence could be broken. That family names didn't have to determine destiny. The New York Times published coverage. The wedding was national news. The quote from their coverage, preserved in historical records. Little Cupid has accomplished what the state of Kentucky exhausted its executive, legislative, and judicial machinery to compass. Love ended what law couldn't. That's the romantic narrative. The story that gets repeated. The version that makes the tragedy seem redeemed. The truth is messier. Grace and Frank were young. Born in the 1860s or early 1870s based on marriage timing. They'd been children or teenagers during the war. Probably didn't carry the same grudges their parents carried. Probably wanted to escape the weight of their family names. Probably saw each other as individuals rather than as representatives of factions. But their marriage symbolizes something real beyond romance. Exhaustion. 20 people dead, 16 wounded, hundreds displaced, entire families destroyed, fortunes lost, homes abandoned, businesses closed. For what? A rock thrown at a polling station, a disputed election, honor that demanded blood for blood in endless cycles. The survivors looked at the cost and said enough. Not forgiveness necessarily, not reconciliation of beliefs or politics, just exhaustion. The recognition that continued violence would destroy everyone, that there were no winners, only survivors and corpses, that stopping required more courage than continuing. Daniel Boone Logan left Morehead in September 1887, 3 months after leading the siege, moved to Huntington, West Virginia, 40 miles across the border, close enough to visit family, far enough to escape the reputation. He built a successful legal career, became respected attorney, never spoke publicly about June 22nd, never gave interviews about the siege, never wrote memoirs explaining his decisions. The silence was deliberate. What he'd done was legally justified, but morally complicated. Better to let it remain in the past. He died April 1919 at age 55. Newspaper obituaries mentioned his legal career and community contributions. Some mentioned he was from Morehead. None mentioned he'd led over 100 men in killing 4 people. That part of his biography was forgotten or deliberately omitted. He's buried in Huntington, not in Morehead. Even in death, the distance remained. Allie Young also left in 1887, went to Kansas initially. Then returned to Kentucky years later, became Kentucky State Senator, successful political career, died February 1935 at age 70. The New York Times published his obituary. He'd achieved enough prominence that national papers covered his death. The obituary mentioned his political service, didn't mention Rowan County. The violence was footnote at most. Cook Humphrey, the Republican sheriff who'd sided with the Martins throughout the conflict, continued in office after the war. Resigned eventually. The sources don't record when or why, just that he survived, that he maintained his position during the violence, that he represented legitimate legal authority even when that authority was meaningless. After the war, when Craig Tolliver was dead and his faction broken, Humphrey's authority became real again. But the experience had to have been traumatic. Serving as sheriff when being sheriff meant nothing, when badge and law were props, when the only real power was willingness to kill. The survivors, widows, orphans, traumatized townspeople, tried to rebuild. Mrs. Martin, whose first name history didn't record. Letitia Bradley, who buried her husband Solomon. The children of the 20 dead. The 16 wounded who carried permanent injuries. They all had to figure out how to continue living. How to raise families in a town where everyone knew who'd killed whom. Where grudges were catalogued. Where political divisions remained even if violence had ended. Some families reconciled. Attended the same churches. Traded at the same stores. Let their children play together. Chose peace over continued division. Others never spoke again. maintained the boundaries, refused contact. The political divisions didn't vanish just because the shooting stopped. Democrats remained Democrats. Republicans remained Republicans. The tribal identities that had driven the violence persisted, just without the violence. The second generation, the children who'd grown up during the war, had to decide, carry forward the grudges or let them die. Most chose to let them die, not from forgiveness, not from reconciliation, from exhaustion, from recognition that carrying hatred was burden they didn't want, that their parents' war didn't have to be their war. The story became a ballad, the Rowan County Crew, or the Rowan County Feud depending on who sang it, passed down through generations. Appalachian musical tradition preserving history through song. The ballad told the story from the Martin perspective, made them heroes and Tolliver's villains, because that's what ballads do, simplify complexity into narrative, create heroes and villains from complicated people who were both. The ballad served as warning, as cautionary tale, as reminder of what happens when politics becomes violence. Generations of Kentucky children learned the story through song, learned that the old days weren't romantic, that blood feuds destroyed communities, that honor culture killed people. In 1993, Kentucky erected a historical marker in Morehead. Brief summary of the violence, dates, death toll, acknowledgement that it happened. The marker stands today, physical reminder that history occurred in this place, that the peaceful town was once bloody Rowan. Today, Morehead State University maintains an archive, the Rowan County War Collection, hundreds of documents, newspaper accounts from 1884 through 1890, court records from trials, letters from participants, militia reports, legislative investigation transcripts. Scholars study it as example of what happens when political polarization, economic desperation, and honor culture collide. Academic papers analyze the conflict. Dissertations examine the legal aftermath. The violence becomes data, becomes case study, becomes lesson. And Morehead itself, it's moved on. Friendly town, university community. Students who attend Morehead State might not know the war happened, might not recognize the significance of the courthouse lawn, might not understand why the historical marker matters. The past is acknowledged but not celebrated, not hidden but not emphasized. But the courthouse lawn where Solomon Bradley died, people still walk across it. Children play there. Events happen there. Life continues on the exact spot where the war began. The site of the American Hotel where Craig Tolliver died. The building is gone, but the location remains. Repurposed. Different structures, different businesses, but the coordinates unchanged. Blood spilled there even if the evidence is invisible. The graves? Maintained. Solomon Bradley in Lee Cemetery. The others scattered across county cemeteries. Stones marking their births and deaths. Dates showing how young most were. Physical evidence that this happened. That these people existed. That their deaths were real. The history is never far away. 20 people died in the Rowan County War. Why does it matter in 2024? Because every element that made this war possible still exists. Political polarization. By July 1885, 90% of Rowan County had chosen sides. Republican or Democrat, family or enemy. No middle ground, no neutral position, no space for people who refused to participate in tribal warfare. Sound familiar? Current American politics features increasing polarization, people sorting into ideological bubbles, refusing to engage with opposing viewpoints, seeing the other party not as opponents, but as enemies, justifying extreme measures because the other side is existential threat. They voted in blocks, refused to see the other side as human, justified violence because they started it. We're not there yet. We haven't reached Rowan County levels, but the trajectory is identical. The mechanisms are the same. The psychology is the same. The only difference is degree. System failure. When courts couldn't be trusted, when prosecutors were related to defendants, when juries were relatives, when sheriffs were 40 miles away, people took justice into their own hands. When law fails, violence fills the vacuum. This is consistent across history and geography. When legal systems lose legitimacy, when citizens conclude that official channels won't deliver justice, they create unofficial channels. Vigilantism, mob rule, lynch mobs. Whatever name you use, the pattern is identical. Today, trust in institutions measures at historic lows. Faith in courts declining. Belief that the system is rigged. Conspiracy theories about deep state and stolen elections. Refusal to accept legitimate election results. These are symptoms of system failure. Not necessarily actual failure. Debate about that continues, but perceived failure. And perception drives behavior. What happens when enough people believe the system has failed? Rowan County provides the answer. When citizens conclude law won't protect them, they protect themselves. When they believe courts won't deliver justice, they deliver their own. The 121 men who laid siege to the American hotel believed they were justified. Juries agreed. Courts validated their perception. The precedent was established. Sufficient system failure justifies extra-legal violence. Honor culture. A man doesn't let himself be robbed and do nothing. Backing down is weakness. Blood demands blood. These weren't just Appalachian values. They're human values, present in every culture. Dormant until activated by the right conditions. Every society has honor culture beneath the surface. Civilization is the process of suppressing it, making revenge socially unacceptable, creating systems where honor comes from following rules rather than enforcing them personally. But honor culture never dies. It waits. And when conditions deteriorate, when economy fails, when law fails, when political divisions deepen, it resurfaces. Social media amplifies honor culture. Every slight is public. Every insult demands response. Every perceived weakness must be defended. Cancel culture is honor culture. Political tribalism is honor culture. The demand that everyone choose sides is honor culture. The refusal to tolerate neutrality is honor culture. We've recreated the conditions that made Rowan County possible. Just digitally instead of physically. The only difference between 1884 and 2024, they had pistols. We have AR-15s. Economic desperation. When the economy collapsed, Rowan County had nothing. County clerk and sheriff positions were survival level important. Jobs that paid cash money in a barter economy. Men turned to illegal moonshine because legal economy had failed. When people are desperate enough, when they have nothing left to lose, violence becomes rational. Not moral, not justified, but rational. The cost-benefit calculation changes when starvation is the alternative. Today, economic inequality widens. Middle class shrinks. Young people feel hopeless. Can't afford homes. Can't afford children. Can't envision futures better than their parents had. Student debt. Medical debt. Wage stagnation while costs increase. The economic pressure builds. How many missed paychecks until someone decides the system has failed and violence is the only answer? How much desperation before rationality yields to rage? Rowan County teaches that the answer is less than you think. The uncomfortable question this story forces us to ask, how close are we? Not could that happen today? It could. It is happening in different forms in different places. School shootings, political violence, January 6th. The mechanisms of democratic breakdown are visible. The question is whether we'll recognize them before crossing the point of no return. Because Rowan County teaches this. Violence is always preventable until suddenly it's inevitable. There's a tipping point, a moment when peaceful resolution becomes impossible. When the spiral of revenge becomes self-sustaining, when everyone knows violence is coming but no one can stop it. Rowan County crossed that point somewhere between August 4th, 1884 and December 1884, between Solomon Bradley's death and John Martin's assassination. Once both original fighters were dead and Craig Tolliver started his reign, the violence became inevitable. The ending was written. Only the body count remained uncertain. And once you cross that line, there's no coming back. You can end the violence. 121 men surrounding a hotel can do that. But you can't undo what happened. Can't resurrect the dead. Can't restore the families that fled. Can't erase the trauma. Can't rebuild trust. The best you can hope for is exhaustion. For both sides to be so tired of killing that they stop. Not reconciliation, exhaustion. Solomon Bradley went to vote. He died on a courthouse lawn. For no reason except that two sides couldn't see each other as human. 20 people died after him. For no reason except that revenge demanded blood, and blood demanded more blood. All preventable, all inevitable. That's the tragedy. That's the lesson. That's the warning that still matters 140 years later.